The last egg. The excavation site was silent, but for the occasional buzz of scanners and the soft hum of the wind through the canyon walls. Mira brushed a layer of dust from the etched floor beneath her boots, the faded glyphs of a forgotten empire glowing faintly under the midday sun. She'd spent the last 3 years studying the remnants of the Vorthari, an ancient alien race that once ruled this planet with cruelty and fire. But what she found buried deep in a collapsed vault wasn't another ruin or artifact. It was warm, alive. A single egg, smooth as obsidian and veined with pulsing amber light, lay cradled in a bed of scorched stone. It hummed softly as if it breathed. Her fingers hovered above it. She should have called the overseer, followed protocol. But something stopped her. The egg responded. She touched it. A shiver ran through her bones. Heat, yes, but also something deeper. Something ancient. And afraid. That night, long after she smuggled the egg back to her quarters beneath the research outpost, Mira sat watching it from across the room. Wrapped in blankets and silence, she studied every flicker of light beneath its shell. The air felt charged, like a storm was waiting to break. Then, a crack. She held her breath. Thin lines spiderwebbed across the surface. A piece broke loose, tumbling to the rug. Then another. A sound, a chirp, a gasp, escaped from inside. With a final snap, the shell split open. What emerged was no bird, no beast from Earth. It was alien, sleek, scaled, winged. Its limbs were too long, its eyes too intelligent. It stared at her with a gaze that was both newborn and ancient. Mira didn't move. Neither did it. "Hello," she whispered softly. The creature flinched at her voice, then tilted its head. Its nostrils flared. It took a tentative step forward. When she extended her hand, it recoiled, but only briefly. Then, as if making a decision, it pressed its nose to her palm. Warm, alive, trembling. She exhaled, gently stroking its head. "You're not supposed to be here," she murmured. "And neither was I." It blinked slowly, curling up beside her hand like a wary kitten. She didn't know what it was yet. She didn't know what she'd just done. But in that moment, something quiet and unspoken passed between them. Not command, not fear, connection. Mira looked at the tiny dragon nestled at her feet and knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't give him up. Not to the government. Not to science. Not even to history. Naming fire. Mira stood at the threshold of her small quarters, arms crossed, watching the tiny creature explore the room with twitching curiosity. It had grown slightly overnight. Its limbs stretched longer, wings folding awkwardly against its sides, claws clinking against the metal floor. It moved with the awkwardness of a toddler and the sharp instincts of a predator. But it didn't act like a predator. Not with her. She placed a bowl of warm broth on the floor and stepped back. The creature sniffed the air and approached slowly, glancing at her with every step. When it lapped at the broth, Mira exhaled in relief. "You're hungry, huh?" she said softly. Its tongue flicked like a lizard's, but its eyes held something else. Recognition. Listening. She sat beside it, careful not to startle it. "You need a name," she murmured. "I can't keep calling you it or hey you." It looked up, a line of steam curling from its nostrils. She thought of fire, of the way it sparked and danced, dangerous but beautiful, of warmth, of destruction, of rebirth. "Ember," she whispered. "That's what I'll call you." The dragon blinked. Then, to her astonishment, it tried to mimic the sound, BR. Her heart leapt. "You're trying to speak?" It made the sound again, then chirped excitedly. Its wings flapped once, sending loose papers flying across the room. Mira laughed, more out of disbelief than amusement. But that joy didn't last long. Later that day, Ember startled when the door to her quarters slid open and a colleague, Drew, entered unannounced. Ember hissed, his tiny body puffing up, tail lashing. Drew froze. "What the hell is that?" Mira stepped in front of Ember instinctively. "Lower your voice. You stole it from the dig, didn't you?" Drew hissed, eyes wide. "Do you have any idea what that is?" "It's Vorthari bioweaponry." "A dragon, Mira." Ember growled. "No," she said firmly. "He's not a weapon. He's a baby, and he's scared." Drew didn't argue. He backed away slowly, muttering about protocols and quarantine. Mira didn't care. She was already kneeling again, placing a hand gently on Ember's back. "I won't let anyone take you," she whispered. That night, Ember curled beside her bed, his breathing soft and steady. A low, rhythmic hum came from his throat, something between a purr and a lullaby. Mira stared at the ceiling, heart full and heavy. She didn't know what Ember would grow into. She didn't know what the world would say when they found out. But she knew this. He had trusted her, and she would earn that trust every single day. Not a weapon. The hum of old data files flickered across the monitor, casting pale blue light across Myra's tired face. She sat at her desk while Ember dozed in the corner, his chest rising and falling slowly, nestled beneath a thick blanket she'd stitched together from spare uniforms. He had grown again, faster than expected. His wings now stretched to the walls when he yawned. His eyes were brighter, more alert, and so were her fears. Earlier that day, she'd found a small node embedded near the base of Ember's neck, tucked beneath scales that shimmered like heated steel. It was a neural chip, Vorthri tech, and it was active. Now, lines of alien code scrolled across the screen. Symbols of control commands, combat routines, trigger phrases. They hadn't just made dragons. They'd programmed them. Weapons. Living, thinking weapons, obedient not by nature but by code. Her stomach turned. Ember stirred in his sleep, letting out a low whimper. Mira crossed the room and knelt beside him, gently running her fingers over his spine until he settled again. The idea that someone could flip a switch and turn him into a killing machine made her sick. She needed help. So, against her better judgment, she called Drew. When he arrived, he avoided Ember's gaze, keeping his distance. "I need you to help me disable the chip," Mira said. Drew crossed his arms. "That thing could fry your whole system if you touch it wrong." "I don't care. I'm not letting anyone control him." "Not like that." Drew hesitated, then sighed. "You're too attached to it. He's not an... His name is Ember," she snapped. "And I'm not attached. I'm responsible." It took hours, but they managed to block the primary signal output. The core programming still lingered, buried but dormant. After Drew left, Mira returned to Ember, who had remained unusually quiet the whole time. He looked up at her now, as if he sensed something had changed. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I won't let them use you. I promise." Ember tilted his head and nudged her hand with his snout. Then, something unexpected. He reached out with one claw and gently tapped the datapad, where an old photo of Mira as a child was open. He chirped softly, curiously. Mira smiled. "That's me. A long time ago." Ember made a quiet trill and placed his claw over the image, then over Myra's chest. It was a small gesture, but Myra's eyes welled with tears. He understood. Not everything, but enough. The world's ceasefire. The sun had barely risen when Ember followed Mira into the outskirts of the research outpost. He walked beside her cautiously, his tail swaying low, wings tucked tight to his sides. She'd wrapped a makeshift cloak around his body to conceal most of his frame, but it barely helped. His shimmering scales still caught the light, drawing curious eyes. Mira had no choice. Ember was growing fast, and they needed food, real food, and supplies. They slipped in the market district quietly. Mira kept a firm hand on his shoulder as they passed stalls, whispering reassurance every time he tensed at loud noises or sudden movements. Ember mimicked her words under his breath, repeating soft phrases like "it's okay" and "safe now" in a broken, childlike voice. But calm never lasts. A delivery truck backfired just as they reached the end of the street. The explosion of sound echoed like a gunshot. Ember froze. His pupils thinned. A low growl rumbled in his throat as his claws scraped against the pavement. Flames curled at the edges of his mouth. People screamed. A man shouted, "It's a dragon. Call security." Mira rushed in front of him, arms out. "Ember, look at me." He twitched, confused, trembling. His nostrils flared with heat, and his wings snapped open. She did the only thing she could. She began to hum. It was a lullaby her mother used to sing when Mira had night terrors as a child. Soft, repetitive, gentle. She'd hummed it to Ember once when he was sick. Now, She poured every ounce of calm she had into it. Ember's eyes darted to hers. His growl softened to a whimper, and slowly the fire died down. He folded his wings and crawled toward her, curling into her side like a frightened animal. Mira held him tightly as the market swirled into chaos behind them. Alarms blaring, soldiers shouting. They fled before security could corner them. Back in her quarters, Ember curled into the smallest shape he could, his tail wrapped around himself. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't meet her eyes. He understood that he'd scared them and her, but he hadn't hurt anyone. Mira knelt beside him, stroking his jaw. "You didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. "They're just afraid of what they don't understand." His voice came low and cracked. "MB are bad?" She shook her head, blinking away tears. "No, Ember is good. Ember is mine." Outside, news feeds already spun the story. Rogue bioweapons spotted in market. Photos of Ember mid-panic flashed across screens. But they hadn't seen the truth. They hadn't seen the creature who'd chosen not to burn. Mira had, and she would never forget. Hunted Sky. For 3 days, they stayed hidden in the abandoned, terraforming silo deep in the canyons west of the outpost. Mira had mapped the area during her first survey rotation and knew this hollowed-out structure would be off-grid and quiet. Ember paced the shadows in silence, more withdrawn with each passing hour. He had not spoken since the incident at the market. He barely ate. Mira watched him from across the room as she tried to repair the damaged comms array. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but exhaustion. She hadn't slept properly since the security alert went out. Every screen on the outpost now flashed her name, Dr. Mira Elen, accomplice to alien threat. A bounty had been issued. Ember's head suddenly snapped upward. He turned to the entrance, growling low. She followed his gaze and heard it. Distant engines. The hunters were coming. Not scientists. Not soldiers. These were off-world private contractors. Men paid not to study, but to kill. Mira grabbed her pack and rushed to Ember's side. "We have to go. Now." But he didn't move. "Ember, please." "I bring danger," he murmured. His voice was rough, as if unused for too long. "You hurt. Because of me." She dropped to her knees, placing her hands on either side of his head. "You listen to me, Ember. You didn't choose to be created, but you are choosing who you become. You protected people in the market, even when you were scared. You're not a threat. You're proof that something broken can still choose to be kind." His golden eyes shimmered. "You not scared of me?" Mira smiled through the tears she'd been holding back for days. "Never." Outside, the engines roared closer. Ember stood slowly, his wings unfurled, now massive, edged in firelight. He stepped toward the silo entrance, turned, and looked at Mira. "Ride." "What?" "You. Trust me. Let me protect." She hesitated only a second before slinging her pack on and climbing onto his back. His scales were hot, but steady beneath her hands. With a grunt and a surge of muscle, Ember leapt skyward, shattering the silo roof with a blast of heated wind. For the first time, they flew together, not in fear, in defiance. Gunfire sparked below as the hunters opened fire, but Ember twisted through the clouds, faster than any drone could track. Mira clung to him, her heart racing, but not from terror, from awe. She was riding a dragon, one forged in the heart of war, but rising now for something more. Freedom. And somewhere deep in his chest, Ember roared, not in anger, but in joy. Sky of silence. The mountains cradled them in mist and snow. After days of flight and hiding, Ember had found a remote summit high above the cloud line, unreachable by most aircraft and undetectable by standard sensors. A ruined observatory, long abandoned, became their sanctuary. Mira moved carefully across cracked stone floors, gathering what supplies she could salvage. Most of the structure had collapsed years ago, but it offered shelter and a clear view of the sky. She breathed in the thin, cold air, heart aching with exhaustion, but grateful. Ember rested on a ledge, his body curled like a great cat, wings folded tightly around himself. His eyes were open, tracking every shadow across the snow. He hadn't spoken much since the escape. He barely slept, not from physical pain. His wounds were healing, but from something deeper. He felt shame. Mira knew it in the way he kept his distance now, the way he watched her with hesitation, as if afraid he might break her by mistake. She approached quietly, carrying a warm cloth soaked in melted snow. "You should rest." He didn't move. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "That you're dangerous, that you don't belong." His eyes flicked toward her, but didn't hold. "I'm thinking the same about myself," she admitted, smiling sadly. "I broke laws, betrayed my own team, and ran from everything I once believed in. I've become someone unrecognizable." Silence. Then Ember's voice, low and raw. "Why help me?" Mira looked up at him. "This creature born from war, built to burn." "Because when I looked into your eyes the day you hatched, I didn't see a weapon," she said. "I saw someone who wanted to live. And love." He blinked, slowly. "Love." She nodded, tears catching in the wind. "Not like in the stories. Not with hearts and flowers. But with choices. With trust. With a refusal to hurt, even when you're strong enough to." Ember lowered his head, letting it rest near her lap. A quiet rumble echoed in his chest. "I do not know how," he said. "That's okay," Mira whispered, brushing her fingers along the ridge of his jaw. "You're learning." For the first time in days, Ember closed his eyes, not in fear, but in peace. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle and unhurried. Inside, the silence between them was no longer hollow. It was full of unspoken understanding, of healing, of something ancient being reborn. The dragon slept, and Mira, sitting by his side beneath a broken sky, finally allowed herself to breathe. When fire cries, the cold didn't bother Ember anymore. His scales held the heat of his flame, and his body, now nearly full-grown, had adapted to the thin mountain air. But tonight, the warmth inside him wasn't fire. It was fear. Mira lay unconscious, wrapped in thermal blankets beneath the remnants of the observatory dome. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. The infection had come swiftly, some toxin from scrape days earlier, unnoticed until her fever spiked that morning. She hadn't stirred since. Ember sat by her side, curled protectively around her form. He didn't understand medicine. He didn't know how to make her better. But he knew helplessness, and it terrified him. He whined softly, nudging her hand with his snout. "Mira," he whispered. No response. He remembered her stories, about her childhood, her mother's garden, the sound of rain on window panes. He remembered her laugh, how she sang to him, how her voice steadied his flame when it wanted to lash out. Now she was fading, and he could do nothing. So Ember cried, not with tears. Dragons had none, but with sound. A deep, echoing, heart-wrenching call rose from his chest, a mournful roar that split the sky. It echoed down the mountains and across the valleys like a soul calling out to the stars. And the stars answered. Hours later, a small transport ship descended cautiously toward the peak. Its lights cut through the fog as it landed beside the observatory ruins. Two figures stepped out, one in a cloak bearing the insignia of the Galactic Preservation Accord, and the other a medic. They came not because of a distress signal. They came because of the roar. The medic rushed to Myra's side, while the cloaked woman approached Ember slowly. She was human, older, eyes sharp but not cruel. "You're the one who called," she said softly. Ember watched her, tense but unmoving. "You protected her, and you didn't run," the woman said. "That's not what a weapon does." Ember lowered his head beside Myra's. "She mine. I hers." The woman nodded slowly. "Then let's save her. Together." Hours passed. The medic administered stabilizers and antitoxins, rehydration packs, and sleep inducers. Myra's fever broke just before dawn. Her lips parted, dry and cracked, and one word slipped out. "Ember." He nearly collapsed beside her, overwhelmed with relief. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be afraid, not for himself, but for someone he loved more than life. And for the first time in his existence, he wasn't alone. Not a weapon, not a mistake, but something else entirely. A heart made of flame, and a soul made of choice. the heart beneath the flame. The council chamber aboard the Accord vessel Solstice Dawn was quiet as Mira stood at the center, facing judgment. Her uniform had been stripped of all insignia. A medical patch still clung to her neck, the last trace of her recovery. Ember waited just outside, too large for the room, too dangerous in the eyes of those watching. But Mira was calm. She had already made peace with what she'd done. Dr. Elen, an ambassador began, voice measured. You disobeyed multiple containment protocols, fled from military oversight, and concealed an experimental bioweapon. I didn't conceal a weapon, she replied, voice unwavering. I saved a life. Another counselor leaned forward. The creature, Ember, was bred for war. What makes you think he won't eventually fulfill that purpose? Mira took a breath and then stepped aside, pressing a panel on her wrist. The chamber doors opened. Ember entered, wings furled tightly, head bowed. His eyes scanned the room, wary but calm. There were murmurs, a few gasps. The council flinched instinctively, but he didn't roar. He sat beside Mira, posture low, gaze steady. I don't expect you to understand him, Mira said softly, placing a hand on his side. But he understands you. He knows fear, love, loyalty. He chose to save me when he could have escaped. He chose not to burn those who hunted him. And when I nearly died, he cried for me, not as a creature of war, but as someone who had learned to care. There was silence. The eldest of the council, a gray-skinned Olari diplomat, finally spoke. Perhaps we must accept that love, like fire, spreads when it finds fuel. And your Ember has found his. They voted. 3 abstained. 2 voted no. But the majority voted yes. Ember would live, under watch, yes, but free. No longer classified as a weapon, but a protected sentient being under Accord law. When they stepped out onto the ship's viewing deck, Mira let the wind hit her face. The stars stretched in all directions, silent, vast, eternal. Ember stood beside her, his reflection shimmering in the glass. We free? He asked quietly. She turned to him with a soft smile. Yes, we're free. He looked up at the sky, then back at her. I want to learn. What do you want to learn? He paused, then touched her chest gently. More of this. Mira covered his claw with her hand. Then I'll teach you. Every day. And together, they watched the dawn rise over a new world. One not born of conquest or programming, but of choice, trust, and something even more powerful than fire. Love.